The land between two rivers. In the Middle East, there is a land where human civilization began. Here, between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, a world emerged thousands of years ago that would forever change the course of human history. This region is known as Mesopotamia. In ancient Greek, the word means the land between rivers. Today, this land is mostly part of the modern country of Iraq. But long before modern borders existed, this region had already become a center of culture, knowledge, and power. More than 5,000 years ago, the first cities on earth appeared here. People began building temples, organizing governments, and recording their thoughts on clay tablets. Writing was born here. The first laws were created here, and here the earliest empires in human history rose to power. Mesopotamia became the cradle of civilization, but it all began with a people that historians consider the first true urban society in human history, the Sumerians. The first cities. Around the 4th millennium BCE, unusual settlements began to appear in southern Mesopotamia. Over time, these settlements grew into the first cities in human history: Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Eridu. Each of these cities functioned as an independent city-state with its own ruler, temples, and armies. The Sumerians developed complex irrigation systems. They redirected the waters of the Tigris and Euphrates to their fields, transforming dry land into fertile agricultural regions. But perhaps their greatest invention was writing. The Sumerians began recording information on clay tablets using wedge-shaped symbols. This system became known as cuneiform. At first, writing was used mainly for trade and taxation, but later people began recording myths, laws, and stories. One of the most famous works of that era was the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest known literary story in the world. Sumerian cities grew wealthy and powerful. But soon a ruler would appear who would unite many of these cities under a single authority for the first time in history. His name was Sargon. The First Empire, Akkad around 2300 BCE, one of the most legendary rulers of the ancient world, appeared on the historical stage. Sargon of Akkad. According to legend, he was abandoned as a baby in a basket on a river, but destiny eventually brought him to power. Sargon became the ruler of the city of Akkad and began a series of military campaigns across Mesopotamia. City after city fell under his control. For the first time in history, dozens of independent city-states were united under a single government. Thus emerged the Akkadian Empire, the first empire in human history. Sargon established a centralized system of administration. He appointed governors in conquered regions and maintained order with a powerful army. The Akkadian language spread across Mesopotamia. Sargon's empire marked a new stage in the development of civilization. But like many great states of the ancient world, it could not last forever. After its fall, a city would rise whose name would become one of the most famous in ancient history: Babylon. Babylon and the laws of Hammurabi. After the fall of the Akkadian Empire, Mesopotamia once again fragmented into many independent cities and kingdoms. But soon one of these cities began to rise rapidly in power. That city was Babylon. By the 18th century BCE, Babylon had become one of the most important centers of the region. It was here that a ruler came to power whose name would become famous throughout history: King Hammurabi. Hammurabi managed to unite much of Mesopotamia under his rule and transform Babylon into a powerful state. Yet he is remembered not only for his military success. His greatest legacy was one of the earliest known legal systems in human history, the Code of Hammurabi. These laws were carved into a massive stone stele and displayed publicly so that everyone could see them. They regulated nearly every aspect of daily life, from trade and family relations to punishments for crimes. One principle became especially famous: an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. The laws of Hammurabi marked a major step in the development of justice and organized government. But centuries later, Babylon's power began to weaken, and in the north of Mesopotamia, a new power was rising: Assyria, the Assyrian military empire. Assyria became one of the most powerful military states of the ancient world. Its capitals, first Ashur and later Nineveh, grew into the centers of a vast empire. The Assyrians created one of the most effective armies of their time. Their soldiers used iron weapons, war chariots, and advanced siege machines. Their military was highly organized and disciplined. Assyrian kings launched massive military campaigns, expanding their empire across enormous territories. At its height, the empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to Egypt and the Mediterranean Sea. Yet the Assyrians were known not only for their military strength, they also left behind an important cultural legacy. In Nineveh, King Ashurbanipal created one of the largest libraries of the ancient world. Thousands of clay tablets were preserved there, containing texts about history, science, religion, and literature. But Assyria's immense power also created fear and resentment among the peoples it ruled. By the late 7th century BCE, the empire faced internal revolts and external attacks. Eventually, one of the greatest empires of the ancient world collapsed, and from its ruins, Babylon would rise once again. The Neo-Babylonian kingdom. After the fall of Assyria, Babylon once again became the center of power in Mesopotamia. This period is known as the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The most famous ruler of this era was King Nebuchadnezzar II. Under his rule, Babylon reached extraordinary levels of wealth and power. The city became one of the most impressive capitals of the ancient world. Massive defensive walls surrounded it. Wide ceremonial roads crossed the city, and the main gateway, the Ishtar Gate, was decorated with bright blue glazed bricks and images of mythical animals. According to ancient tradition, this was also the time when the legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon were built. They later became known as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Nebuchadnezzar was also famous for his military campaigns. In 586 BCE, his army captured Jerusalem and destroyed the first temple. Yet even Babylon's greatness would not last forever. Soon a new superpower appeared on the horizon: the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire and Alexander the Great. In 539 BCE, the history of Babylon took another dramatic turn. The city was captured by the army of the Persian king Cyrus the Great. The Persian Empire quickly became the largest state in the ancient world, stretching from India to the Mediterranean Sea. Mesopotamia became an important part of this vast empire. The Persian rulers governed their territories through a system of provinces known as satrapies. This system allowed them to control enormous lands efficiently while maintaining stability across the empire. Babylon remained an important administrative and cultural center. But 2 centuries later, a new conqueror appeared in the region: Alexander the Great. In 331 BCE, his army defeated the Persian king Darius III in a decisive battle. Soon after, Alexander entered Babylon. The city welcomed him as a liberator. Alexander planned to make Babylon the capital of his New World Empire, but those plans were never realized. In 323 BCE, Alexander died in Babylon. After his death, his vast empire fragmented, and Mesopotamia became a contested region for centuries. Yet many centuries later, a new city would rise here and become one of the greatest cities in the world. Baghdad. The birth of Baghdad. In the 8th century, the region entered a new historical era. After the spread of Islam across the Middle East, power shifted to the Abbasid Caliphate. In 762 CE, the Caliph al-Mansur ordered the construction of a new capital. Thus the city of Baghdad was born. The city was designed according to a unique architectural plan, a perfectly circular layout. At its center stood the Caliph's palace and the Grand Mosque. Baghdad quickly became one of the largest cities in the world. Major trade routes connecting east and west passed through the city. Caravans brought silk from China, spices from India, and goods from across the Islamic world. But Baghdad was not only a center of commerce. It soon became one of the greatest intellectual centers in human history, the Golden Age of knowledge. During the Abbasid Caliphate, Baghdad experienced an extraordinary cultural and scientific flourishing. In the city, scholars established a remarkable institution known as the House of Wisdom. This was a unique place where scholars from many different regions gathered to translate ancient texts and conduct research. Works of Greek philosophers, such as Aristotle and Plato, were translated and preserved. But the scholars of Baghdad did not simply preserve knowledge, they expanded it. During this period, major advances were made in mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and geography. The Persian scholar Al-Khwarizmi developed the foundations of algebra. His work would influence mathematics across the world for centuries. Baghdad became a center of learning that attracted scholars, philosophers, and travelers from distant lands. By the 10th century, it was one of the largest and most prosperous cities on earth. Yet even great civilizations can face sudden catastrophe. For Baghdad, that catastrophe came with the arrival of the Mongols, the Mongol destruction of Baghdad. In the 13th century, a new and terrifying force appeared in the horizon of the Middle East. From the east came the Mongols. Their armies had already destroyed many great cities across Asia, and now they were moving toward Mesopotamia. In 1258, a massive Mongol army led by Hulagu Khan arrived at the walls of Baghdad. The city that had once been the center of science, culture, and trade in the Islamic world was unprepared for such an invasion. The siege did not last long. The Mongols broke through the defenses and entered the city. What followed became one of the greatest catastrophes of the medieval world. Baghdad was almost completely destroyed. Thousands of buildings were burned or demolished. Libraries and centers of learning were wiped out. According to historical accounts, the waters of the Tigris River turned dark with ink from the countless books thrown into the river from the destroyed libraries. The Abbasid Caliphate, which had ruled the Islamic world for centuries, came to an end. With the fall of Baghdad, the golden age of the region was over. Mesopotamia would never fully regain the global importance it once held. The Ottoman era. After centuries of instability and struggles between different powers, the lands of modern Iraq gradually came under the control of the Ottoman Empire. By the 16th century, the Ottoman sultans had firmly established their authority over the region. Iraq became part of a vast empire that stretched from southeastern Europe to North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. The Ottomans governed the territory through provincial administrations. The most important cities of the region were Baghdad, Basra, and Mosul. Although Iraq held a strategic position between Persia and the Mediterranean world, it remained largely a provincial region within the empire. Local economies were based on agriculture, regional trade, and caravan routes. Power in many cities was often shared between Ottoman officials and influential local families. This Ottoman period lasted for nearly 4 centuries. But in the early 20th century, global events would dramatically reshape the political map of the Middle East, and Iraq's destiny would once again change. The birth of modern Iraq. The First World War marked a turning point for the entire Middle East. The Ottoman Empire, which had controlled the region for centuries, was on the losing side of the conflict. After its collapse, the territory of Iraq came under British control. In 1920, the British established the Mandate for Mesopotamia. However, British rule quickly sparked strong resistance among the local population. Several uprisings broke out across the country. In response, Britain decided to create a formally independent state. In 1921, the Kingdom of Iraq was established. Faisal I became the first king of the new nation. The new state united diverse regions and populations, including Arabs, Kurds, and other communities. Soon after, vast oil reserves were discovered in the country. Oil would become one of Iraq's most important economic resources and would greatly influence its political future. But with wealth also came new tensions, and the decades ahead would bring major conflicts that would shape the modern history of Iraq. The era of Saddam Hussein. In the second half of the 20th century, Iraq entered a period of major political change. In 1958, a revolution overthrew the monarchy, and Iraq became a republic. In the years that followed, power shifted between different political groups and military leaders. In 1968, the Ba'ath Party seized power. This political movement promoted Arab nationalism and a strong centralized state. One of its most prominent leaders was Saddam Hussein. In 1979, Saddam Hussein officially became the president of Iraq. He quickly consolidated power and established an authoritarian political system. During his rule, Iraq invested heavily in infrastructure, industry, and military strength. However, his government was also marked by strict political control and repression of opposition. Soon the country would become involved in one of the longest and most destructive conflicts in the region's modern history, the Wars of the Region. In 1980, a major war broke out between Iraq and its neighbor Iran. The conflict lasted 8 years and became one of the bloodiest wars of the late 20th century. Both countries suffered enormous losses in soldiers, civilians, and economic resources. By the time the war ended in 1988, Iraq's economy had been severely weakened. Only 2 years later, another major crisis emerged. In 1990, Iraqi forces invaded the neighboring country of Kuwait. The invasion triggered a strong international response. In 1991, a coalition of countries led by the United States launched a military campaign against Iraq. This conflict became known as the Gulf War. Iraqi forces were eventually forced to withdraw from Kuwait. After the war, Iraq faced strict international sanctions that placed heavy pressure on the country's economy and society. The 2003 invasion. At the beginning of the 21st century, Iraq once again became the focus of global attention. In 2003, the United States and its allies launched a military invasion of Iraq. The official justification was the belief that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction. Within weeks, the government of Saddam Hussein collapsed. Saddam himself was captured later that year. In 2006, he was executed after a trial by the Iraqi authorities. However, the fall of the regime did not bring immediate stability. Instead, Iraq entered a period of deep internal conflict. Different political, ethnic, and religious groups struggled for power and influence. In the years that followed, extremist organizations gained strength. One of the most dangerous was ISIS, which in 2014 captured large areas of Iraqi territory. Iraq today. Today, Iraq continues to rebuild after decades of wars, sanctions, and political turmoil. The country possesses some of the largest oil reserves in the world. Oil production remains one of the central pillars of Iraq's economy. In recent years, the Iraqi government has worked to strengthen national institutions and rebuild infrastructure damaged by years of conflict. Many cities have slowly begun to return to normal life. A new generation of Iraqis is becoming increasingly involved in shaping the country's political, economic, and cultural future. Despite the challenges it still faces, Iraq remains one of the most historically significant regions on Earth. It was here, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, that the earliest chapters of human civilization were written. And the story of Iraq, like the civilizations that rose and fell on this land, continues to unfold.